Well, good evening. This is StabtheDragon, back with another whiskey review, number 17. This will be Black Velvet, a Canadian blended whiskey. Black Velvet. So here we are in the middle of February in Fort Worth, Texas. We got another blast of winter today. A couple of weeks ago, we had an ice storm, and then it warmed up nicely. I know how people up north and in the mountain states or back east, they say, oh, you Texans can't handle the cold or the snow. We don't get snow. We get ice. And so ice is just a different animal than snow. I grew up in northern Oklahoma and had snow. But down here, most of the time, instead of snow, we get ice. And so ice is just a whole different thing. So laugh at us if you want. We do have an aversion to cold weather. But tonight, in celebration of the cold weather that we've been having lately, I thought I would take a break from reviewing the North Texas Fort Worth area whiskeys and give some honor to the Canadian truckers who are staging a little revolt and support Canada just a wee little bit. I'll celebrate this cold by reviewing this good Canadian whiskey, Black Velvet. So a little history behind Black Velvet. It's a bit more mysterious than I think it should be, either because the company website simply doesn't want to go into the deep history of the whiskey before it was named Black Velvet, or because somewhere along the line somebody made up a bunch of stuff that's not true. So the stories are pretty cool, sort of, but I think some of it may be false. So I'll tell you what I think is true and what I think is false. The Black Velvet website has the story behind the whiskey. They say they came out of the first barrel, they marketed it in 1951. But it does say that the original name was Black Label. But when the distiller, Jack Napier, tasted it, he changed the name to Black Velvet because it was so smooth. So does this mean that the whiskey had a history as Black Label prior to 1951? That's kind of how people have interpreted it. And that's almost what every other website I checked has, is that, hey, the whiskey used to be a Black Label. So that's the story that I've heard. The old story says this whiskey was issued to naval officers during World War II who were on submarines. And some say it was issued to Canadian naval submarine officers. One was even very specific and said it was on submarines at the Battle of Midway. Well, there's a problem with that. I don't think there was any Canadian submarines at the Battle of Midway. The Canadians were not fighting with the Americans against the Japanese at Midway. I just don't think that happened. And so that story, I think, goes beyond the pale. Whether something from Black Label was issued to the Canadian Navy, I'm not sure. But when I did a search for Black Label whiskey online, I got nothing but Johnnie Walker. There you go. And that whiskey dates back to 1909. So Black Velvet on Wikipedia. There's an article on Wikipedia about Black Velvet. And it explains their version of the story by saying the owner of Black Label was a company named Palliser, or the distillery's name, Lethbridge Distillery in Lethbridge, Alberta, which is kind of close to Calgary, I think. This distillery opened in 1932. Other sources I saw said 1933. But here's the kick. It was gin and vodka, and it was called Black Label, until master distiller Jack Napier changed it to Black Velvet, and they say, Wikipedia says, the late 1940s. So that doesn't quite match what the Black Velvet website said, 1951, but it's maybe accurate. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Now, the Wikipedia article, I got to tell you, was poorly written. It was kind of hard to figure out exactly what they were saying. And so it may have given me some good info, but it was poorly written. Now, I went to Beverage Dynamics, And there's a 2019 article about Heaven Hill acquiring Black Velvet. And this article had some good stuff. It gives a bit more of the history, explaining that two English guys, Walter and Alfred Gilby, were distilling gin in 1872, and they expanded to Canada in 1906. Now that's over 30 years difference there. And they built the distillery in Lethbridge in 1933. Well, now that's 60 years. And so I'm not so sure how old these guys were, if they really did that in their 80s or what. And they say, that is Beverage Dynamics, that Black Velvet was developed in 1946. So that kind of matches Wikipedia. But that it didn't hit the market until 1951, which matches the website of Black Velvet. Now, here's how it makes sense. If you develop it in 1946 and put it in the barrels, then by 1951 it's going to be ready to bottle and sell. So that kind of might make sense. A little bit confusion there, but I think we've figured that out. So how do I score this whiskey for history? I'll say the article by Beverage Dynamics, combined with Wikipedia, combined with the website of Black Velvet, kind of lends to some confusion, but you can, if you dig through there enough, you can come up with plausible answers. So I'm going to say, with that little bit of confusion, I'm only going to give it 3 out of 5 points for history. Now let's talk about marketing, packaging, and the bottle. The advertisements that I remember as a kid in my dad's hunting magazines, or Time and Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, maybe Popular Mechanics, Popular Science, I remember seeing advertisements for Black Velvet. Now, the story goes that in 1969, Patricia Victoria Miller was the first of many Black Velvet models. And that list includes some notable names: Christy Brinkley, Sybil Shepherd, Cheryl Tiegs. Now, and there was some guy models too who posed for Black Velvet. Telly Savalas was one of them. I've not seen any ads lately because I just don't look at magazines, I guess. But I'm pretty sure I've seen a Black Velvet billboard somewhere in the last 5 or 6 years. Now, the bottle itself is, I think, very classy. And so you're looking at a whiskey that's, maybe 12, 13 bucks, something like that. Now, it does have a screw top, not a cork. But the shape of the bottle is vaguely feminine. And I think that's on purpose. So if you kind of look at the bottle, I mean, it's vaguely feminine. But the black and gold label, I think, is quite well done. It matches the name and the color of the whiskey. You've got some kind of a coat of arms up here on the neckband that's pretty cool looking. There, and then the same coat of arms down here at the bottom. Right there. Clear glass. It says imported there at the top, and then Black Velvet underneath. And I guess that word imported is, yeah, I mean, it's accurate. I mean, it comes from Canada, but I think it makes it more attractive to some people. Oh, I'm getting imported whiskey. Underneath the bold gold name is blended Canadian whiskey, established 1951. It goes on to clarify what a Canadian whiskey is by saying, blended at birth, distilled and aged 3 years in oak, under the supervision of the Canadian government. Well, that last part, Canadian government, I could do without. 40% alcohol by volume, or 80 proof, in a 750 milliliter bottle. So I've really got to give this bottle and the marketing 5 out of 5 points, because I do remember these ads from my childhood. I've seen billboards somewhere, and it's a very classy bottle. So 5 points. Now, the composition of this whiskey, Canadian whiskeys are put together very differently than American. If I understand the process correctly, They use corn, barley, rye, and wheat, but distill them separately and age them separately, and then they mix them in bourbon barrels and age them again. So they blend, in Black Velvet, when it says blended at birth, uh, what that means is they do an extra step that other Canadian whiskeys don't, in that they age the different grains separately, and then they mix the aged distillate with some base alcohol and age it again. Something like that. It's a very complex process that for my brain I couldn't really grasp it, I guess, but it'd have to be explained to me a little bit better. But this Black Velvet is 80 proof. Some coloring may have been added because that's legal in Canada. So out of 15 points, I'm going to say 11 points for the composition, because there's no mash bill that I can find anywhere. But I did see in one of my whiskey books the Black Velvet tends to use more corn than other Canadian whiskeys. Other Canadian whiskeys more wheat and rye, but Black Velvet's more corn based. So the appearance of this whiskey is a pale yellow, very light golden. It's got pretty good legs in the glass. So I don't know if you can see the legs in there or not. So it's a fairly light colored whiskey. So I'm going to say 3 out of 5 for appearance. Aroma. Now my nose is notably bad. I just can't smell stuff. And it's always been that way. It's not, I had COVID in January, but didn't really affect that. COVID affected my eyes, my sinuses, chest a little bit. But I'm getting just a slight hint of toast or corn dust, something like that. So I'll benefit of the doubt, 7 out of 10 for the aroma. Now for the tasting. With my very basic whiskey tasting skills, I can say that this Canadian whiskey is quite pleasant. It's sweet. Like all other Canadian whiskeys I've had, I get a maple syrup type flavor. And I don't know if that's psychosomatic because of the maple flag. I don't know. Maple leaf. But I've always, there's a certain flavor I get with all Canadian whiskeys that I've tried. And it's kind of a maple, along with a little hint of leather, could be wood. There's just a tad peppery thing at the back end that could be rye, and it's really quite nice. I have to say, I approached Black Velvet with some prejudice because a lot of the reviews I watched on YouTube were very negative. There was some positive, but I have just seen a lot of negative comments about this whiskey, and so I approached it. I was really debating, should I even buy it after some of the YouTube videos that I watched. But I had consumed some Canadian Club 12-year and some Crown Royal Deluxe, so I had a general idea of Canadian whiskeys. And then when I got this bottle and tried it, I was pleasantly surprised. And I see why this whiskey is so popular with the average guy. Some sites I read stated that this is the second largest selling brand of Canadian whiskey behind Crown Royal. But of the lists I've seen, it's third because you've got Crown and then you've got Fireball. Now, granted, Fireball is not technically a legit whiskey. It's a liqueur. So, it depends on how you define things, I guess. But I've had several Irish whiskeys, and most of the Irish whiskeys I've had are blended as well. And I've got to say, I'm going to be different. I think I like Canadian whiskeys better than Irish whiskeys. And I'm going to have to do a whiskey tournament sometime with Canadian to see which one I prefer. But I kind of think Black Velvet may be my favorite Canadian whiskey. Maybe so. So I really enjoy it. For taste, I'm going to give it 22 out of 25. Mouthfeel, finish. This is an 80 proof whiskey, and the mouthfeel is kind of medium. It's not thin. It's not as rich as some other higher proof whiskeys I've had, or even some scotches at 80 proof. But I'm going to say it's a medium mouthfeel. It doesn't feel thin. Finish is surprisingly long, and I get both the maple syrup and a spice, like a rye spice maybe, peppery, really at the end, and it lingers. So it's got a pretty nice finish, I think. There's not much of a burn, but there's a little bit of a burn. It's a very pleasant burn. So yes, this is a smooth as velvet whiskey. Now, if you swallow it too quickly, if you swallow it just right, it gets up in the sinuses, yeah, that'll burn. But really, this is just an exceptionally smooth whiskey. And normally, I tend to prefer whiskeys that have more of a burn. I like the burn. I grew up eating hot, spicy foods, so I kind of like the burn. But here, the flavor really makes up for not having a burn. So mouthfeel and finish, I'm going to say, is 12 out of 15 points. So now let's look at the price, value, and availability. Total Wine in Fort Worth has this 750 milliliter bottle for $8.99. Wow. Goody Goody has it for $1 more at $9.99. Specs comes in at the highest with $10.49. I don't actually, I think I got this at Goody Goody. Pretty sure. Yeah, Goody Goody. This bottle of deliciousness then is readily available worldwide. I mean, it's a huge seller. And the price is extremely good. So I'm going to say this bottle has excellent value. Now, is this a high quality, rich whiskey with all kinds of depth and flavors? Probably not. But this Canadian blend is just right for me on a cold winter evening. So with me, it's a keeper. 9 out of 10 points for price, value, and availability. Now, is this a neat drink or is this a mixer? I drink most of my whiskeys straight, neat, not even an ice cube. I've tried putting ice in a high ABV whiskey and it just ruined it. So I don't know. I prefer neat. I can see this being used in a cocktail because it's so sweet. You know, if you like a nice sweet cocktail, this would probably be a good whiskey for that. It might go well with something just like a Coke or 7-Up. But I'm not really into mixed drinks. And so, you know, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for being a good, neat drink. Final category is bonus points. I think the combination of its taste, its price, the attractive bottle all combined to give this whiskey 4 out of 5 bonus points. And here's to the truckers in Canada. And I know somebody's saying, hey, just keep to whiskey and stay out of the politics. StabtheDragon Productions here. We do politics, we do religion, and we do whiskey. So there you go. Total points for this whiskey come in at 80 points. And that's actually a little bit low compared with some of the Texas whiskeys that I've done. But some of these Fort Worth whiskeys that I've done that aren't quite as tasty as Black Velvet, they scored high on history and bonus points and some things like that. So what I'm going to do is give it a letter grade next. And here I'm going to say B+. And I could do B+ whiskey all day long. Well, not all day long, but every day. Okay, I mean, this is, to me, this is a wonderful daily sipper. Okay, so my recommendation, if you're on a very tight budget, this whiskey is a great buy. Its taste and price are a very good combination. If you're interested in trying a Canadian whiskey, this must be on your list because it's a bestseller. If you're seeking a pleasant whiskey that's great for relaxing, where you don't have to work to enjoy it, I would say try Black Velvet. See, the Scotch community here is just huge and can be very aggressive, very imposing. And I like Scotches. They're okay. But Scotches, to me, require work. They require a lot of effort. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But Black Velvet is a type of whiskey that, man, it's just a good sipper. It's just a good everyday sipper. That's what it is. If you've got a sweet tooth, this Canadian blend can hit you on the sweet tooth. Very definitely. Well, that's it for Black Velvet and this edition of Stab the Dragon. And so if you drink, don't drive, drink responsibly, and we'll see you next time. I think next time I'm gonna shoot for early next week because President's Day is Monday, and I'm gonna try to do something related to President's Day. May not be on Monday because I've got kind of a tight schedule on Monday, but sometime next week I'll do something for President's Day. All right, signing off, out here.